In addition to Philippe, who will join us here, we have Alizabeth Calder, who is the SVP and CIO of HomeEquity Bank. If you want, you guys come on up here as I introduce you. So Alizabeth, in addition to being the CIO for HomeEquity Bank, she actually works on IDC's CIO agenda program, and her particular focus there, speaking to one of Philippe's point about how do you market the IT function and yourself. Her specific focus working for IDC is how do you drive board level influence, how do you drive line of business influence. She has written research reports for IDC on that topic, and we can probably share some of those through the association with members as well, and she'll be talking about that. And she will be speaking at the Peer Forum in April on that topic as well. How do you drive influence as a CIO? So fantastic topic. Okay, and then we have Phil McBride, CIO for Molson, Coors, Canada. Come on up, Phil. Phil actually, prior to joining Molson just about a year ago, thank you, sir, was the CIO for EMEA. So he has an amazing background in the whole retail loyalty space. So we'll be able to draw upon that. And he actually told me about a year ago that he was working on some very interesting event-driven real-time applications at EMEA. So we'll be able to talk about that as well. And then finally, Joe Pucciarelli, who runs IDC's worldwide CIO agenda research program. Come on up, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Lars.
Joe spent a good 5 hours at the Boston airport waiting to come here today.
But they got the spare part there.
Yeah.
Real time, event-driven.
Absolutely. So Joe's been the architect behind some of IDC's most important research at the CIO advisory level. So we're really fortunate to have him here in the room today joining the panel. And I want to make sure we make this interactive. Obviously, we're going to kick it off, have each one of them introduce themselves, and talk a little bit about kind of their core project around digital transformation that you're working on right now, that you want everybody to know about, and then we'll go on with questions. So why don't we start with you, Philippe?
Okay.
What's the main project you're most excited about right now that you're working on, digital transformation at Canada?
Can you still hear me? Yes. Okay, we're good. There's lots of cool projects. We're doing stuff with AI. We're doing stuff with blockchain, which you'll hear about tomorrow. The coolness about where we are today is all about that digital transformation I kind of talked about a few minutes ago, and the empowering of the entire organization, and this is a federal organization of 6,000 employees, Transport Canada, and seeing everybody's eyes light up that we can move the yardsticks with a whole new story about how we work, about what tools we're going to use to make that happen. And it's just so exciting. So I would say the biggest project for us is changing that culture, bringing in the new way of thinking, the new way of developing. Like, for example, let's say we had a new policy or a new regulation. We would just write out what we've done for the past 30 years. Okay, this is how we're going to regulate this. This is how we're going to make it annoying for everybody. This is how it's going to be on paper. This is how we're going to ensure that they don't break the rules in CN and Air Canada, or we don't think about how we're going to develop our policy and our regs that way anymore. And I think that's probably the coolest thing. So it's a whole digital shift of the entire Transport Canada population. With a lot of the things I kind of talked about with, we have monthly activities where we kind of say, like, for example, in November, and I'll just stop talking after this one, we have disruptive tech. So the whole department gets involved with disruptive tech. So for example, we're working with Microsoft, where in each of our offices in Vancouver and Montreal and Toronto, they're going to bring in our inspectors with HoloLens technologies, and we're going to start to show them the different way of doing inspections. Instead of traditionally having a piece of paper, going to the dock or going to the airplane, they'll be doing this potentially with HoloLens, and a back end that enables them to go through their whole process. So I think that's most exciting for me, because it's not just one tiny little project, but it's a whole organization transforming.
That's fantastic. Elizabeth?
So the company that I work for is called HomeEquity Bank. We do reverse mortgages, which, for those of you who don't totally understand that, that's no different than a regular mortgage, except that instead of somebody in their 30s has a down payment and goes and buys a house, and then they make mortgage payments to pay down the loan. more and more the generation of people 55, 65, older are finding situations where they've got, $5 million in value in their house, but they don't want to leave their house to take that $5 million out to buy a place in Florida, or to get the kids through school, or to buy the kids a condo, or to pay for additional home care for significantly older clients. So our client base is basically 55 to dead, and they're, in reality, don't quote me on that. And so we're in a very traditional version of the mortgage. So I was having a conversation earlier with the fellow from RBC. The things the big banks are doing, put that aside. We're a very traditional client base. Now, interestingly, about a year and a half ago, I said I think we should do a client portal so people can, because quite often somebody will be approved for $100,000 and they'll only take 40, and then they can have access to the rest of their money and things. And then, nobody's going to want that. Well, we did it, and more than half of the people who were on it right away, fat kid on a Smartie, yeehaw, this is great. We've got one guy who continues to look at his mortgage every day. Go figure. But on average, the people who were using it were the people over 71. I was thinking I'm 61, so I was thinking people my age, but it's the people over 71. They like being able to go and look. So the biggest thing we're doing right now, and one of the genesis, I guess, of my passion for trying to help people who do what I do engage better with their boards. How many of you have ever had the CFO say, we need to get some AI, or something like that? We need to buy an ERP. We need to, oh, sure, no problem. We'll just do that tomorrow. Boards are even above that. They get on an airplane, they read a magazine, they hear about the kind of things that you're talking about, and I roll over in my grave on that, because they have no idea what that takes, and they don't understand why it can't be done tomorrow. And if something comes up in a conversation about business strategy at a board level, and they're confused, well, why can't we do that? Why aren't we there now? What have you been doing all this time? And so I have a real passion for helping board members understand that what you do next, you don't want it to be the only gate, but what you do next does have to depend on where you are now. And so a big transformational deal for me in my company right now is we've looked at what are the really painful places. I spent 10 years in the middle of my career at IBM. We used to spend a lot of time talking about, what is not the best use of my time and energy? What am I not the best person to do? What jobs am I not the best person to do? We spend a lot of time and money on lawyers because everyone has to have independent legal advice, but our lawyers have to do stuff. And we spend a lot of money on appraisals because unlike the US model of a reverse mortgage, we will never take more money than is available from the sale of the house. Doesn't matter how long that mortgage has been in place, doesn't matter how much interest has accrued. We have the algorithms to understand the markets and to make sure that we're never underwater, and if we're underwater, we eat it, not the person going into a senior's home or not the estate. So appraisals are really important for us, and paying attention to those things. So my transformation, and I know this isn't anywhere on your radar at all, but it's been, okay, let's do good old-fashioned business process outsourcing with a company that has that national team of lawyers who can do all of that stuff with the digitized contracts and with the digital signatures and with, I'm not going to go build that. I'm just not. There's no way. We have 225 employees. There are 30 people in my department. Not building any of that. So we went and found a company that is able to do all of that higher tech and increasingly high tech lawyering. They also have the ability to do that higher tech and increasingly high tech appraisal stuff. So they can pay attention to markets and segmentations and all those things. Okay, let's partner with them. Let's, nice old-fashioned API. Let's send the data back and forth. Let's make it talk to our proprietary system. and let's get ourselves out of doing those things. So I know for many of you, like probably for you even, it's not all that exciting, but it is transformational given where we are now or where we were a year ago.
No, that's a great point, right? You obviously have to start where you're at and go from there. So, Phil, with a completely different client base,
different bit.
All of us in the room.
Maybe same customer.
Sounds like you have to drink. So, yeah, thank you. So I'm the CIO of Molson Coors Canada. I have been since this spring. Quick aside, and to your introduction, because how many times you've been at a Canada Exchange seems important. We've been saying that the whole time. Previous to this, I led technology for Aeroplan at AMIA. And I was supposed to be in Tremblant last year, right up to the last moment. And then that same week, Aeroplan got purchased by Air Canada, and I was very importantly needed in Montreal to talk about that, and missed the event. So I'm surprised to be invited back and happy. And I was making sure I didn't miss this one, even though Molson Coors was in the news in a couple of weeks. So Molson Coors Canada, many of you might know, right? We make beer. Or do we? Right? And that's the heart of the biggest transformation that I'm working from a technology standpoint is Molson Coors is a beer company. Beer hasn't changed as a recipe since the Egyptians. The beer industry has changed, but not that rapidly. And the beverage industry within food and beverage hasn't changed that much. But it's changing now. And Molson Coors is one of those companies, much like also our rivals/competitors, or much like the whole industry, where it's always defined itself by being a beer company, and that plays out right down to our IT systems, our ERPs, and how we do business in our supply chain, and our culture. And we're no longer a beer company. We're a beverage company. We now make kombucha. We might now make hard seltzer. Now we're still a beverage company. We haven't expanded into other things beyond that, but we're not a beer company. And this is the heart of the transformation in IT that concerns me. It's fundamental, and it's not just about the systems. Yes, our systems are perfectly designed to deliver beer, and that we have to transform that to deliver any kind of beverage. There's a flexibility there and a speed to market that isn't there, that is driving my technology agenda and my technology transformation. But I'm almost finding, not that that's the easy part, that's hard enough. There is a deep culture, even within IT, about being a beer company that needs to change. And that part, and what it means for technology, and is fundamental to us being successful in transforming ourselves as an IT organization within Molson Coors, so that we can drive a transformation of a beer company into a beverage company.
Very, very interesting. From beer to beverage, and we'll get back to that. So, Joe, over to you.
Thank you. So, I've been a research leader for a long time. I've worked at different research houses, so I've had the experience to interact with many folks around the world. 2 comments tonight. As an analyst, you have, it seems like it's a very fun job, but it's a job that requires, frankly, a lot of humility. And it requires humility because what you probably don't know is that once a year, most of our research gets peer appraised internally, and we get effectively graded as analysts. And that process requires humility because you can be the most sure of anything you've seen in your life, and then you come back a year later and you'll see it. Now, the thing that I've found is that for me personally as an analyst, I am usually pretty good at getting the endpoints. But man, I have a lot of problems with the timing. I overestimated, I underestimated. I just can't get that timing thing right. And there's a comment that is been attributed to Bill Gates, but with some controversy. And that comment is that, he's surprised by how little things change in 2 years and how much they change in 10. That's really one of the things that's different this time. The rate of change is really going faster. If you take only one thing away from this whole 3-day confab, and you're going to be exposed to a lot of great ideas, it's that the rate of change really is going faster. And that has personal implications for us as leaders and as people and as parents and as members of a community. And my question is, what are you going to do differently for you? Are you going to budget an hour a day? You're going to get to work an hour earlier a day and spend an hour a day reading. Half an hour a day reading. It's not enough to be exposed to one technology conference a year. There's just too much going on. The second thing I'm going to say, we talk about what's different this time. What's different this time is that we, as CIOs, as technology leaders, are not buying the tech anymore. The line of business has a material voice in what's being bought. Okay? So we've gone from running a walled garden to now having to build consensus across organizations. And that is a power of 10 more difficult. You made the comment about emotional intelligence. Well, you need emotional intelligence to implement a governance architecture, right? That is not a command and control function. That's a great point you made. What am I doing for transformation as a leader of a research team? Well, I looked at my own research. My own research says that the line of business people are buying the tech. Where are they getting the information from? I bumped into one of the chief research librarians inside of, and I'll say his name, of the company, of IBM. 300,000 people a year, and 300,000 people at IBM have access to our CIO research. And it's one of the things that they as an organization read a lot. But the thing that's driving the librarian crazy is that the research leadership is going up 20, 30% a year. Because people outside of IT want to read the research reports from people like my team. That has a fundamental implication for me, because what you demand is a thorough, comprehensive, 7 to 10 page treatise on something that is built on a foundation that you're willing to invest millions of dollars on. And I respect that, and I get it, and that's what my team produces. But you know what? When the HR person wants to read something, that's not what they want. They want a 700-word article. 600's better.
On YouTube.
On YouTube.
Right.
And that's not a bad thing. The point is that they have this thirst for the knowledge. They recognize that they need information, but they want to absorb it differently. That has implications for all of us in this room. We have to become leaders inside the organization. We have to communicate to our colleagues. We have to teach them new languages and new skills. So that's what keeps me up awake at night. And boy, I'm telling you, I haven't been sleeping much lately. Thank you.
So that's fantastic. So we talked a couple of weeks ago about some of the questions we wanted to address. But before we start there, why don't we go up to everybody here? Anybody who has something they want to... Over there, lady in the middle here. If we got a microphone there. If you could just say your name and the organization you're with.
Hi, I'm Tracy Dallaire. I'm from Mohawk College. My job at Mohawk is to help make sure we're building the right talent that will go into working in the operational parts of business and the corporate functions and IT. And I've been in corporate IT, and I sit now advising all our academic leaders in strategic technologies. And we have a bit of a conundrum, and maybe the panel can start to help us talk through that. There's different perceptions around sort of what are the roles or the jobs of corporate IT functions, both within corporate IT, but then in operational parts of businesses. So as we're looking at talent that will come up, let's say they've taken networking, computer science, or they've been in engineering or other fields, technology is, I think you said, Joseph, it's growing. It's the lines of business driving it. So I think we need talent and people in those lines of business that understand tech. We need people in IT groups that understand tech. Some view that, well, tech is the business of corporate IT. And I think there's a misperception sometimes of what corporate IT's role ought to be and what are those people within the lines of operational parts of business, what's their role in driving that? And I don't know the answer to that, and it's something, we struggle with. And we work with a lot of industries. We have about 250 companies. We work with every year doing industry-intensive research, and they're struggling with it. And they're the ones hiring the talent pool we're producing. So appreciate your thoughts.
So maybe we could start, Phil, if you want to start with have you organized or potentially changed anything inside Molson in terms of your organization, how it's embedded, not with line of business, and then maybe move Joe, from your point of view afterwards, in terms of what you see across a lot of different companies?
It's a great question. I wish I've solved it. Here's the answer. No, and the other organization been the same thing. It's a great question, and it's evolving fast. I would say a few things, especially at Molson Coors, and all tied up. It's hard to not then start dropping buzzwords like product versus waterfall project or agile, or it's tough because the role does change in the dialogue around technology. So the expertise in the line of business versus what would be central or corporate IT. For us, that is rapidly changing and somewhat controversial. For us, I don't see a corporate IT anymore. Now, there's the same governance is needed, the same centralization of things. So you mentioned network or infrastructure or just the strategy behind how we're using certain foundational technologies, security and reliability, service operations, the whole ITIL process and incident management. Certainly, capabilities that are, best collected together and not extended out to all the lines of business, because then you'd just be a free-for-all. But for us, increasingly that's provided by our partner companies and increasingly as a service, not even something that we staff for. So it's left our corporate IT then at a bit of a crossroads in that as we move to more product, which should have our IT embedded within those products, which would be the line of business, drawing on some kind of center of expertise or COE capability to make sure all the products are doing the same thing. But that traditional corporate IT of infrastructure, networking, and operations largely should shrink to the point where I'm getting that as a service in my products. And me at Molson Coors, I'm not worried about that corporate IT function anymore, other than a security and governance layer to make sure it's all driving the right way. That's how I see it.
So, Philippe, do you want to comment on, from a Transport Canada perspective, what do you see?
I think a really valid question, and I think, as per my initial session, IT is driving business. So business will be IT. IT will it's going to happen. I like a lot of what Phil said. I do think there's a space for data, though, data science, infrastructure, and enabling the business, because to move all that data in an organized way, in an architected way, I think that's where most of the corporate IT will be. We are, for example, to solve some of that problem, I'm giving Gartner memberships to all of TC, not just to the IT folks now. So that's a way of changing it. We're upgrading their skills. We're changing their classifications. They're becoming data scientists. They're starting to understand how they can drive value with user-centered design. They're becoming product managers. So I think, at least for us at TC, we've kind of mapped that out, and we started to do that across all of our business lines and our programs. And it's incredible, the delivery that we can now get, because they're now getting a little bit more educated now. So both the IT people and the business people are now actually talking, whereas before they were just talking different languages. And we were developing products that no one cared about and no one understood, and they were upset. So I think that those are some of the techniques or some of the things that are going to, I think you got to drive as a chief information officer or chief digital officer, and that's where you're going to get the most value and drive for your organization.
Maybe, Joe, from your purview, looking at a lot of large companies across the globe, maybe what trend are you seeing around this, how this shifts?
I was going to share an example from one of the largest defense contractors in the world. He and I had a lengthy conversation about this, that played out over 18 months to deal with exactly the challenge that you're raising. The first thing he said was, Joe, you have to recognize that as a CIO, you're not responsible for everything anymore. He said, that took me 6 months to internalize. What we're doing, and I'm paraphrasing this CIO, what we're doing in this defense company is IT is responsible for the following things. IT is responsible for basically the backbone. It's responsible for governance. It's responsible for security, regulatory compliance, and sourcing. Okay? What's it not responsible for? Well, in his world, one of the hot things, and this is an aerospace company, it's 3D printing. So the IT function in one of the departments got 3D printing. Now, the CEO assigned the head of that line of business that responsibility. Now, when you think about most universities, by the way, I had an opportunity a few years ago. I was invited to the CIO gathering in Boston, which was a very interesting group of folks. They said to me, Joe, you just don't understand our world. Labor is zero. They're called graduate students. So all of your models about IT don't work. The point is that when you look at a typical university, it's a lot of departments, and people outside don't understand that. You've got A's, B's, and C's in terms of technology sophistication. You need to recognize the A's, the B's, and the C's. You need to assign specific ownership of certain initiatives across the university to be led by one of those departments. And then there's ones that are in the C's, and you just keep them out of the way and keep them away from the controls.
Elizabeth, from your perspective, having worked, being the CIO at one point for IBM Global Services, now working for a specialized bank, how have you seen this change, and what's your comments on this?
So I guess I'm going to come back to the fact that you're at a college. Maybe you need a little bit more of that chief marketing officer hat, because as the CIO in a small company, I won't even claim mid-market, one of the things that's been the bane of my existence for the last 3 years has been how to get consistent vernacular across, but so there's not a line between IT and the business. How to cross-pollinate the understanding of things as we start into new projects. And I have found it very difficult with all of the resources available in the city of Toronto, at least, to the point that I'm now, the first year I thought I'd done really well because I got the HR department to commit between $3,000 and $5,000 a person for training. I thought, yay, I can do training. And then I went looking for the training that I could buy. And unless it was a kid who's in his third year in the service management function who wants to certify on something, or all of the courses are aimed at certification streams and are aimed at very specific niche audiences. But at the same time, when I've actually given one of my people the opportunity to have us pay the tuition and them go and take their Tuesday and Thursday nights for 6 weeks and take that course, then the course gets canceled because there's not enough registration. So that's not working. So what I've actually gotten to the point now I do is, and I'm on my 4th kind of internal series, and this is a 225 employee company. I'm running internal one-day sessions where I can put the business people and my people in the room together on subjects that they all need to get better at. So we've done a day on root cause analysis, because people don't get it when for the 4th time you say, okay, why? Okay, why? When they come to you and say, well, it's not working. We need to know more than that. So I put some of the people in the business who are, the guy who runs the customer service desk, put him in the room to do root cause analysis training with my people, so we all get better. I've run one session where I've had all of the people who tend to be our predominant UAT leads and my business analysts to talk about, kind of a mature framework for business analysis, and which was the foundation for some changes we made about how we worked internally. I've now done 4 of these one day, and in one case it had a second day, because the only way I could find training that was going to be helpful across my business was to customize it to what I was doing. And that's really expensive for me. You probably can't do it. You definitely can do it. Really expensive for me to do that, And so I think one of the challenges in organizations like yours has to be to figure out what's really different, because the kids are coming out of school deep on some technology, almost too deep on technology. IBM isn't creating engineers and architects anymore. So how do you broaden that? Mm-hmm. How do you give them the other skills without them having to sign up for 3 years worth of PMO certification? Right?
That's a great point, right? How do you upskill and keep? So TCS, some of you know Tata Consulting Services. They have a T-score for every employee. That the vertical part of the T is your technical depth, and the top of the T is your width. So your emotional intelligence, your ability to negotiate, all the social skills or business skills. And everybody at TCS, from the CEO down, has a T-score. And they publish it. And of course, they make training available to all the employees. They have any training you want, you can get. But the key point is they publish your T-score, and everybody can see their T-score. It forms part of the performance. If your T-score isn't growing up, it's a problem. And they all love it because not only does it focus everybody's attention on training, they all become more competitive in the marketplace. It helps them rise within TCS. It helps them make themselves more employable in the markets. So
I just want to add to that, Lars. I think that that's a great example because what it does is it demonstrates a focused need to solve problems. You know, we talk about a lot of our technology stuff. Most business leaders I've met don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, for grins and giggles today, let's shoot holes in the bottom of the boat. Okay? People have a bad night because there's a problem,
right, and
they don't know what to do. And it's at that crux of recognizing the problem, that's when those moments of insight come. Mm-hmm. And that's what drives it. And I think when we see the examples of a lot of the innovation that's going on in the market, it's when folks have had that moment of insight, mm-hmm, that I need to do something different. We need to do something different. And it's that motivation. It's not just tech for its own sake.
So another thing that we talked about when we talked was the speed, and you've heard it here from Blaine, from Nigel. The world is changing. Denis talked about it as well. We heard it from our panelists. The world is changing faster. We need to. So one thing that we talked about was DevOps. So hey, what's the standard answer? How do we do things faster? Well, Agile DevOps comes up all the time. So we'll go to questions after this, but why don't we start there? So maybe we start, Philippe, on the side here, shortly, very quickly. What's your main learning from switching the methodology here? How are you when you're trying to get things to market faster? What's your key learning?
Well, by switching to that model,
yeah,
we actually deliver. Period. We actually deliver, and the customers are happy. I mean, it's so simple. It's an integrated team. We have the product management team, the business team, the tech team. They're all in the room together. They're not writing. I remember when I first started in IT, I would have to read a 300-page requirements document, and trying to pick apart like what was right or what was wrong there. I really think that it's changed our whole ability to do that. And we have one example. I don't know if anybody has taken advantage of the zero emission vehicle rebate. Has anybody bought a Tesla on it? Yeah, okay. So great program, by the way. We forced Tesla to lower their price from 55 to 45K so that people like him could take advantage of that program. But the minister announced that in April. We didn't know we were doing this in April. April he announced it. And then within a month, we developed end-to-end the full solution to be able to take somebody who bought a car, give them the incentive, authorize it, work with the dealers, et cetera. And we wouldn't have done it because we're working already in a DevOps way, we were able to put everybody together. And that included the policy people, the program people, the change management people, the comms people. It was just a whole big team working for a whole month to deliver this. So everyone's happier. We didn't spend $2 million on this thing. We only spent $180,000 to develop this thing end to end. And now it's already delivered. We were supposed to have $180 million for 3 years. We've already spent $128 or $130 million in 7 months. So I don't know. The Liberals are in power again, so maybe they'll extend it. I don't know. But my point being, it's just. I'll just say that it's night and day between what you used to be able to do and what you can do now.
Elizabeth, what's the challenges? So I'm just going to say that all it's done is move the cheese. For us, from a small organization perspective, so we've developed the capability in the DevOps group to genuinely have really quick turnaround and to genuinely parse things into something that is you start with minimum viable product, and then we can look at additional fees, all those things. And all it's done is shed light on, I'll go so far as to say dysfunction, in the governance process. So in the old way of doing things, everybody knew how to be the noisiest dude in the CEO's office, and everybody knew how to wind their way into getting on the top of the prioritization list. It's not for the faint of heart, because the good news is, yay, we're successful, DevOps, it really works, we can do to turn things around, and yay. The bad news is everybody else realizes, oh yeah, it really works, and so then everything should be done in 2 days. And well, if you're doing all this stuff so much faster, how come I have to wait for that? And it just all it's going to do is push out the risks. So you have to pay attention in parallel. And I think in an organization like yours, you've got the size and the structure and the maturity to get there. How many of you are more mid-market? Not too many. Okay. For mid-market, the breakage comes because back to your T, emotional intelligence, business maturity, genuine negotiation, clarity on requirements, not trying to sneak more in. All of those things are where the folly starts in a less mature governance model. So the governance is what breaks next.
Yeah, that's the key.
So I've been 3 shops with very different experiences. When I started at AMIA, it was a kind of a startup within AMIA making a global software as a service product. So it was from scratch. Full Agile, full DevOps, full cloud, happy days. Moved from that to Aeroplan, which was retrofitting a large waterfall-based process into Agile and not going well at it. And Molson Coors were about half and half, where we have a lot of, especially in the brewing and things delivered in waterfall, and any new products, especially global ones, we do Agile. So it was a mix, but by intent, not just because we haven't got around to it yet. So across all 3, very, very different experiences, and as I go, I scratch my head more about why we weren't doing what the previous one did. A couple of common things across all 3, the common challenge I've seen is legacy. I'll put that word. Now, you'll think I mean legacy technology because we're all in IT, and I almost don't, because that I thought would be the hard part. If I'm inheriting a bunch of legacy technology, what do I then do about it? Smart guys like this guy over here will get me a microservices wrapper around that, make it event-driven, and make that legacy problem go away. So that ended up being not the biggest problem I had. It was legacy processes or legacy thinking. You can name them. Budgeting. Budgeting was at Aeroplan, was one of the biggest barriers to going Agile, because the budgets were given on 1-year waterfall cycles. You came in with a business case for one big project, you got your CapEx, you ran a digital project. How the heck to then get a collection of stories and epics out of that in a way that was responsive and keep going back for budget, every 6 weeks on a sprint cycle? Yet going in and saying, just earmark the whole year, trust me. I'll let you decide which features we should do as the year goes on. It's, get out. So how to get budget if the whole budget process is an Agile. HR, same thing. Recruiting, how to cycle up and cycle down sprint teams if you're not using a partner, if it's internal. So, and then partner and what that is. So those touch points, so it almost became as hard as I thought it would be to transform IT into a full Agile shop or scaled Agile for enterprise or DevOps. Once that was underway and going well, it was the touch points to the rest of the organization, especially around budget and other supporting functions, that became barriers.
Yeah, that's interesting. Joe, your experience?
We have a lot of clients, and the feedback we've gotten is the interface between the organization and IT is the challenge. But the real issue and the opportunity for DevOps is that if you interview CEOs, most CEOs will have on their top 5 list, we've got to get the clock speed of the organization up. We've got to go faster. So yeah, I'll concede all the problems. But what we're doing there is it's a way to drive and flush out where the problems are in the organization if what the leadership objective is to drive the organization at a higher clock speed.
Where it breaks down is when we're moving the cheese. So if we end up just saying, well, IT's fast now, but finance isn't.
Right.
That's just not.
Exactly.
So that's why it has to be a CEO level or at least a lead team level conversation, and all have to be bought in.
And those other bodies have to really, governance can't just be my job anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
No, for sure. I mean, transformation must be driven from the top down. Absolutely. Otherwise, it's really difficult. Questions? from in the back here.
How have you found it with your auditors?
Actually, I'm probably not the right person to answer that because we have a single end-to-end system, and as long as I make sure security and controls are in place, they're not bothering me. You guys.
I would say the same. I would say the same principle. The same. I would say in anywhere I've worked in those couple that I mentioned. Is it a change also in how audit happens? Yes. So a good audit group understands that and is doing it. But the tenets of what they're auditing, the principles of good security, good processes, good governance, documentation behind it, whatever it may be, don't change really.
Yeah, like you still got the same. It's.
I would disagree. They do change.
Okay. So how did they change?
To some extent, you're going to, in a good agile process, DevOps process, you're going to carry less stock.
Sorry, could you?
So,
The microphones isn't working. All right. So while
my auditors don't look at my documentation. They just look at whether the system is. They look at the process flow. They look at whether the system has additional security exposures or identity-based access is still there, or things like that.
Okay. Any other questions that we can continue that discussion on governance maybe after?
well, I just want to finalize that. It does have to change. What you measure, what you invest in, changes, but it's measurable. And if you're doing prototyping more, if you're doing, you're just changing what you're paying for and the timing for what you're paying that. So I think if you work with your finance people and with your governance people to get them to understand that, you can change the capital investment model that reflects the DevOps model. And it does have to change, and you have to work with them. And I think when you speak to accounting people, they like to count things and see things. There's great discussions that I've had with them that say, hey, look, instead of before where I used to show you I have a charter, a project plan, whatever, a list of 50 documents we used to have as part of the project management framework that we used to follow. And we still follow a bit of it. But the point being, now I've got a product, I've got a delivery, I've got a client, I've got, it actually, it makes sense, and the accountants can't really argue with that from my perspective.
Very good. Other questions? And sorry, over here. Yeah, we have a.
Hi, I'm Musawa Chaudhry with Panago Pizza. So the theme of the evening is apparent that the rate of change is really high, and CIOs have to respond to that real fast, and we're at the center of it. It's apparent, examples, Philippe's example, that minister announces a policy change and we have to implement that really fast. Phil's example that we are using legacy applications and building some microservices around it. It starts to feel really shaky at some point because your whole enterprise is now cobbled together with many microservices. Your spend is now controlled more by CMOs and some of the other partners. They are reading a lot of research. They know what's happening in the industry. There are lots of demands. So how do CIOs now step back and convince the CEOs and CFOs and the board to actually be more strategic? Because at some point, and I worry, some of these microservices that we have built are, one small thing is going to fail and we're not going to find out where that failure is. So how do we actually change our investment model? What's the advice, panel's advice there?
Joe, you want to start?
I'd like to take a shot at that. I actually get that question a lot from a lot of CIOs. Typically, the question's worded a little differently. And I'm sorry, we're kind of peeking around the podium here. The question is, as a CIO, I see the virtue of these new technologies. My organization doesn't. What do we do? How do we raise awareness as to the possibilities? My comment and my observation is that if your business has been in business for 5 years, you have figured out how to solve problems inside the four walls of your organization, or you wouldn't be there. If you've been there more than 10 years, then you're pretty good at it. The problems are the issues that are outside the four walls of your organization that you may not have good visibility to. And most organizations don't really have good intelligence systems to get what's going on the outside and bring it in. How many times in the last quarter, not in the last year, in the last quarter, did you go out on the road with a salesperson and visit a client?
Hey.
You want to interview?
I went to visit inspectors in the field to see how they did their job.
Perfect. Thank you. But the point is that, you said, well, how do we get urgency? The answer is you look back on the organization from the outside, through the eyes of an inspector, through the eyes of a business partner, through the eyes of a supplier, through the eyes of a customer. And you're going to see things about your organization that are going to churn your stomach. And there are going to be opportunities. And the leadership team is either going to accept that and embrace it as an opportunity and choose to elevate their game with you as somebody who's potentially facilitating that change, or they're not. And that should give you guidance as to where you want to spend the next 10 years of your career. By the way, IDC believes that in the next 10 years, between a third to a half of large organizations are going to be so disrupted by digital transformation that they're not going to be recognizable as their current companies.
Yeah, career-wise, that's question number one: is your company a winning company or not? Phil, comments on?
Yeah, I'm going to talk around the podium, but I'll just talk in general if you can hear me. It's a great question, and it's a great daily struggle. At times, it does feel like it's that Fortress IT would have been an easier way to live. I'm cognizant of saying that in Quebec City, which is surrounded by walls, which is kind of funny. If that was on purpose, well done. And those walls are now gone. And sometimes, do I feel the CIO, or my job is more of a CMO for technology internally than it is a CIO manning the walls? Absolutely. Sometimes I'm selling dreams as much as I'm selling security and reliability. But that's part of the point. And maybe every organization is different as well, like you said, and knowing what works in that organization. And to some degree, it's also picking the battles. I don't fight every battle of every bit of technology that gets discussed as part of a strategy, because I think those days are gone. If they're not discussing technology in that meeting, then I'm more worried, because technology better have been at the heart of the strategy to even thrive as an employee and shareholder. I hope so. Now, when every decision is made, and I'm not in every decision, do I have that check-step moment of whether that's the battle I should fight? Absolutely, because they're not always going to be winners. Now, I find, though, is concentrating on the things that shouldn't change in any of those situations. The strategy, that the technology strategy, and I don't mean a strategy for IT. I mean the strategic focus of the business and how technology enables it. Doesn't matter who procures it or advances that agenda. Ideally, if I'm on side with whether it's the CMO, whether it's the CFO, and their technology agenda is aligned with mine. When it's not, that's something to fight. So making sure that strategy, again, not the IT strategy, that should come from that. And the second one, and then the rest of the list becomes the governance, the scalability, the security. Those are almost, to me, that was the table stakes. As long as I'm the purveyor of scale and security, and if that is questioned, I have a bigger problem for IT. But if that is not questioned, then I can go forth into the rest of the strategic aspect. And I found for me is, instead of spending my time fighting over every vendor or every technology bit of budget that got spent, if instead I'm concentrating on selling in my vision of real time and speed and flexibility, then the rest of the decisions almost fold in. It's almost like, instead of saying I need to be at the table and telling them that, I'm almost starting to get invited more, because IT is seen as the home of speed, which isn't always the case, by the way. I'm not saying I've got that solved. I just mean changing the conversation a bit. And so in my early days at all those organizations, I spent a lot of time saying, you need me there, you need me there. And as soon as that changed to, Phil, you need to be there, Phil, you need to be there, I knew I was making progress.
So question. You mentioned scale. So when you mention scale, what's the role of architecture in scale?
It's critical.
Very, sorry, you go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think just to answer the question, like the reason why we were able to do this in a month was because we had enterprise architecture, we had built components for scale, and we were able to piece them together to meet this function. That's what we were able to do quickly and rapidly. If we were starting from scratch with nothing to start with, I don't know if we would have been able to do this in a month. So I think it's really critical that you keep that pulse on what are your key functionalities, capabilities, things that your organization needs as a business to be successful. You got to build those out. Build those out in an agile way with the DevOps, and fund them through certain capital initiatives that might be coming your way and leverage those to fund those components. If you do that, then that can be built out for so many other functions or business value that you might have for your organization. So that's my thought process to add to you and you, and to answer your question. You can't just let it, you have to have some thought and strategy and enterprise look on these things, or else it will take you longer to develop it, because when the new opportunity comes forward, like the Zev thing for us, we took advantage of that, and we looked like rock stars because that was there.
So we're coming up on 6:55, and I'm sure everybody's getting hungry, and we are luckily in Quebec City. We know the food here is going to be amazing. It always is good. When you come from Toronto to Quebec, it's always a great experience. Everybody here will be here for the duration of the conference, so take the opportunity to network and pose questions to the panel throughout. So with that, we're going to give everybody 1 minute each, sort of final piece of advice, final thing that you have learned as a CIO that's relevant today that you want to pass on to the team here. I know that's putting you all on the spot, but why don't we start with you, Joe?
I thought I had it because I was at the end of the road here, so I had a minute to reflect.
You got it.
I come back to, we are in, and I loved your question. You said, why do you want to be a CIO? What are you enjoying? That's a question I haven't heard asked enough. These are times of amazing, amazing stuff in our lives. And I think we're living through it, and I think we're on kind of autopilot. We're not embracing how cool it is. So my comment, my challenge to you is, what are you going to do about your own personal development? How are you going to budget half an hour a day for your own personal development so that you can really embrace this and be a leader? Whether it's inside your organization, a nonprofit you nurture at home, whatever it is, with your kids, your grandkids, I think it's a great time to be in tech.
Wow. Enterprise architecture is important. That got me crazy for like 45 seconds. It becomes very important. Okay, on the CEO question. For me, I list of things when I was jotting down what that advice would be. The big one for me is each of you in everyday interactions you do in your companies, you know your company's best, and you know what it takes for technology to be successful in your company's best. The rest of it is the organization politics and getting it all done. Each of you in every daily interaction, you're setting the tone for the CIO or IT in your organization. So every time you react to something, every time you talk a vendor, every time you talk strategy, you're setting the tone because it's not defined. The CIO job description is not defined out there. And you guys are creating it as we go, and it'll be very different in a couple of years from it is now, and it's thanks to all you guys, and hopefully us, and Lars. And so you guys define it. And it took me a while to realize that the silos that I was bemoaning and complaining about and constantly trying to change were also reinforced by me and my team. And not that I've solved it to this day, but it took a realization for me that every interaction I do, I am creating the silo. I'm the one creating how IT is viewed and how I act, and then half the time I'm complaining about it. And once I realized that, I kind of could do something about it. So each of you just be the CIO you want technology to be in your company. Be the change in the world.
All right.
Back to follow. So I guess what I would offer is a different spin on the question we've been engaged in, which is, first of all, understand for yourself, what CIO do you want to be? Do you come to these conferences and hear about whatever's the cool whiz-bang next freaking thing that's coming down and that's what you want to go and play with, and you want to lead an architecture team, and if you want to go and do that stuff, yeehaw, have a good time. Someday you will be the chief marketing officer of some whiz-bang tech company, maybe. But that isn't the role of the CIO as a strategist. If you want to be the CIO, if you want to do that stuff, get really good at making sure your team gets trained, making sure you've got skills, making sure you've got the operational procedures, making sure you got the governance, you close the loop, all those things. If you want to be the strategic business leader, if you want to be the CEO or something like that, then you have to stop spending all your time thinking about the technology, because the technology comes from what you're trying to make different. First, you got to figure out what you're trying to make different. How many of you have actually read your most recent company annual report? front to back.
I skipped a few pages, but
Like, you've got to understand what your board is talking about, because they're thinking 18 to 24 months out. And they're not talking about technology. They're talking about, we're going to go into China. They're talking about, so for example, I've gone into 3 different companies where private equity owned the company, and I was given a very clear job. We want 3 technology-based products that are new, so that when we go to IPO, we can say we've got technology products. We want you to shiny up the apple because we're not sure that it's polished enough. Know what your board wants to do. Know what your CEO wants from you. And it's probably words like cloud. I'll be surprised if they use AI. They're going to talk about what's different in the business. If you want to be that strategic CIO, force yourself to spend time talking in business terms, not technology terms.
That's great advice. Philippe, last word?
Yeah, well, I've said a lot, so maybe people are getting bored. So I may change my title to Chief Implementation Officer. I think that's pretty important. I just throw that out there. I think you have to deliver. So that's advice that I think that I would heed. Just if you're just talking and going to conferences and you got to walk the walk. And so that, I think, is an important piece. And then there was something, John Herdman. Does everybody know who John Herdman is? No. Wow, it's incredible. Anyhow, he took the women's soccer team and he made them, they won 3rd place, I think, at the FIFA World Cup. And now they finally beat the U.S. just recently, 2-0, and that's John Herdman. And so we had him at one of our peer forums. And he said 3 words to me, and I think these are probably good 3 words for you to think about in terms of how you approach your daily life. Passion, so passion for your work, passion for your family, passion for anything. Make sure you develop a vision, so that's about the strategy. Don't just go in there without a vision. And then have a disciplined way of executing on it. Back to my Chief Implementation Officer instead of Chief Information Officer. So I would say that's 3 words that I live by on a daily basis that make me happy.
That's fantastic.
Forget about success, but make me happy.
That's great.
All right.
So I'm going to hand it back to Phil. So a round of applause. Thank you to our panelists.